The observation deck of the UES Horizon offered a spectacular view of the Matari fleet, sleek predatory vessels that seemed to cut through space itself. Captain Ethan Cross adjusted his dress uniform one final time, knowing this moment would either forge peace between species or doom humanity to another war. "Remember, Captain," Admiral Bennett's voice crackled through his earpiece, "you're not there to fight. You're there to talk." Ethan almost laughed. 6 months ago, he'd been leading ground assaults against insurgents on Europa. Now he was humanity's diplomatic hope because someone in command thought his unconventional approach might work with the warrior Matari. Translation: he was expendable. The airlock hissed open, and Ethan stepped into the Matari vessel. The corridors were built for beings much larger than humans. Everything towered above him, making him feel like a child in a giant's house. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. 2 Matari escorts flanked him, their scaled hides gleaming under the strange lighting. They said nothing as they led him through the ship, but Ethan could feel their contempt radiating like heat from their massive frames. The conference chamber doors opened with a sound like thunder, revealing a space that could have housed a small shuttle. At the far end, a figure rose from what looked more like a throne than a chair. Commander Kalen Voss was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Nearly 8 feet tall, her muscular frame was covered in midnight blue scales that shifted to silver along her arms and neck. Her face was angular, almost draconic, with piercing golden eyes that seemed to dissect him on the spot. Bone ridges crowned her skull, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been questioned. "So," she said, her accent turning the simple word into something predatory, "this is what Earth sends to negotiate with the Matari hegemony. A small, soft creature who looks like he'd shatter in a strong wind." Ethan stepped forward, keeping his spine straight despite every instinct screaming at him to show submission. "Captain Ethan Cross, representing the United Earth Alliance, and you must be Commander Voss." Shorter than I expected. The chamber fell silent. The 2 escorts' hands moved to their weapons, but Kalen raised one clawed hand to stop them. Her lips, if they could be called that, pulled back to reveal teeth designed for tearing flesh. "Amusing," she said. "Do all humans possess such boldness? Or are you simply too ignorant to recognize a superior predator?" "I recognize a warrior when I see one," Ethan replied. "The question is whether you recognize one in me." Kalen descended from her platform with fluid grace, each step echoing through the chamber. She circled him slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. "Warriors prove themselves through combat, not words. Your species speaks of peace through weakness, of diplomacy through surrender. The Matari respect only strength. Then test me." The words left Ethan's mouth before his brain could stop them. Kalen paused mid-stride, those golden eyes narrowing with something that might have been interest. "You challenge me to ritual combat? You barely reach my chest, human. I challenge you to see what humans are really made of. Unless the mighty Matari are afraid of a small, soft creature." For a heartbeat, Ethan thought he'd gone too far. Then Kalen threw back her head and laughed. Sound like breaking stone." "Very well, Captain Cross, let us see what fire burns in human hearts." The sparring chamber aboard the Matari vessel was designed for beings who considered violence an art form. Ethan shed his dress uniform, standing in simple combat fatigues that seemed pathetically inadequate against Kalen's ceremonial battle armor. The scaled plates caught the bioluminescent lighting, making her look like a living weapon. "Standard Matari challenge protocol," she announced, removing her armor piece by piece until she wore only form-fitting combat gear that did nothing to diminish her imposing presence. "First blood, or submission. No permanent damage. We are diplomats, after all." Ethan nodded, rolling his shoulders to loosen tight muscles. He'd fought bigger opponents before, but none with natural weapons like claws and teeth. As they circled each other, he cataloged her movements. Fluid, predatory, but also methodical. She was testing him, waiting for him to make the first move. He didn't disappoint. Ethan lunged forward with a boxer's jab, aiming for her center mass. Kalen twisted away with inhuman speed, her claws raking across his shoulder. First blood to her. But instead of backing away, Ethan used his momentum to grab her arm, spinning her off balance. For just a moment, surprise flickered across her features. "Clever," she hissed, recovering quickly. Her next strike came faster, a sweeping claw aimed at his throat. Ethan ducked, drove his shoulder into her midsection, and actually managed to lift her off her feet for a split second before she brought her knee up toward his ribs. He twisted, took the blow on his hip instead, and immediately countered with an elbow strike that connected with her scaled jaw. The impact sent shockwaves up his arm, but Kalen actually staggered. The watching Matari officers murmured among themselves. Apparently, making their commander step backward was noteworthy. "You fight without honor," Kalen snarled, though there was something like approval in her voice. No ritual, no ceremony, just efficiency. "I fight to win," Ethan replied, wiping blood from his shoulder. "Thought that's what warriors respected." They clashed again, and this time Kalen held nothing back. Her strikes came like lightning, forcing Ethan to rely on speed and unpredictability rather than strength. He couldn't match her power, but he could frustrate her expectations. Where she expected retreat, he advanced. Where she anticipated aggression, he defended. When her claws raked across his chest, drawing 3 parallel lines of blood, Ethan grabbed her wrist and used her own momentum to throw her across the chamber. She rolled, came up in a crouch, and for the first time since he'd met her, she was breathing hard. "Impossible," one of the watching officers whispered. "No human should—" "Silence!" Kalen's roar echoed through the chamber. But when she looked at Ethan again, her golden eyes held something new. Not respect, not yet, but curiosity. The fight continued for another 10 minutes, both of them bleeding, both refusing to yield. Finally, Kalen caught Ethan in a hold that should have ended it, her arm around his throat, her superior strength ready to choke him unconscious. But instead of struggling futilely, Ethan did something no Matari would have expected. He went, completely limp, dead weight in her arms, then explosively reversed the hold using leverage instead of strength. For just a moment, he had her pinned, his forearm against her throat. They stayed frozen like that, both panting, both knowing he could never maintain the position against her superior strength. Finally, Ethan released her and stepped back. "I yield," he said simply. Kalen rose slowly, those golden eyes never leaving his face. "Why?" "You could have continued." "Because this wasn't about winning. It was about proving a point." Ethan touched his bleeding shoulder. "Humans aren't weak, Commander. We're different. Sometimes different is exactly what you need." The silence stretched until Kalen spoke, her voice thoughtful. "The survival training on Xerion 7 begins tomorrow. You will accompany me personally." She paused. "Try not to die, Captain Cross. You are more interesting than I anticipated." As the Matari officers filed out, Ethan caught something in Kalen's expression. A flicker of genuine interest that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with the man who'd just surprised her. The caves of Xerion 7 offered blessed shelter from the howling winds outside, but the sanctuary came at a price. Both Ethan and Kalen bore fresh wounds from their encounter with the moon's apex predators, crystalline hunters that moved like liquid death through the razor-sharp terrain. Ethan's left arm hung useless at his side, 3 deep gashes from crystal claws painting his sleeve crimson. Kalen limped heavily, her right leg bearing a puncture wound that leaked blue-black blood onto the cave floor. The emergency beacon lay in pieces 50 meters away, destroyed when she'd thrown herself between Ethan and a hunter's killing strike. "You're an idiot," she muttered, settling against the cave wall with a pained hiss. "I could have taken that hit. My scales are armor. Yours is just soft flesh." "Your armor was already cracked," Ethan replied, tearing strips from his undershirt. "And you were favoring that leg before the attack. Don't pretend you were at full strength." The small emergency fire cast dancing shadows across the cave walls, turning Kalen's midnight blue scales into flowing patterns of light and dark. She watched him approach with medical supplies, her golden eyes wary. "I can tend to my own wounds." "I'm sure you can. But you can't reach the puncture properly, and I need you to look at my shoulder." He knelt beside her, close enough to smell, the strange, not unpleasant scent that seemed to be uniquely Matari, like ozone and warm metal. Truce? After a long moment, she nodded. Truce. Working in careful silence, Ethan cleaned the puncture wound on her thigh. Her scales felt surprisingly warm under his fingers, and he noticed how they shifted color slightly at his touch, becoming more silver than blue. When she hissed in pain, he found himself gentling his touch automatically. The Matari heal quickly, she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. This will close within days. Good thing, since we might be here a while. Ethan finished wrapping the wound with synthetic bandages from their emergency kit. The storm system could last a week. When it was her turn to treat his injuries, Kalen's claws retracted completely, leaving only long, surprisingly dexterous fingers. Her touch was careful, almost reverent, as she cleaned the claw marks on his shoulder. Your skin is so thin, she murmured, more to herself than to him. How do humans survive anything? We're tougher than we look, and we heal the important things. Ethan met her eyes. Why did you take that hit for me back there? Kalen's hand stilled on his shoulder. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind outside and the crackle of their small fire. You would have died, she said finally, and that would have complicated the mission. Would it? Or would it have solved your problem? No more weak human to babysit. Her golden eyes flashed with something fierce. You are not weak. The words came out fierce, almost angry. Any Matari warrior who fought as you did would be honored in our halls. What you lack in size and strength you compensate for with what? Courage without stupidity, intelligence without cowardice, and something else. She finished, bandaging his shoulder, but her hands lingered on his skin. Something I cannot name in either of our languages. The firelight played across her features, and Ethan found himself seeing past the alien angles to something unmistakably feminine. When she'd been fighting, she was all predator. When she was commanding, she was pure authority. But here, in the quiet intimacy of shared vulnerability, she was simply beautiful. On my world, Kalen said quietly, female warriors must prove themselves twice as hard as males. We cannot show weakness, cannot show doubt, cannot show... She trailed off, her gaze fixed on the fire. Cannot show what? Interest in those deemed beneath us. Her voice was barely a whisper. Humans are considered amusing creatures. Clever, pets perhaps, but not equals. Never equals. Ethan shifted closer, close enough that their knees almost touched. What do you consider us? Kalen's eyes met his, and in them he saw a war between duty and desire. Between everything she'd been taught and everything she was beginning to feel. I consider you, she said slowly, the most dangerous human I have ever met. Dangerous how? Because you make me question everything I thought I knew. Her hand moved to his chest, palm flat over his heart. Your heart beats so fast like a frightened bird. I'm not frightened of you anymore. Then you are even more foolish than I thought. But her voice held no sting, only something that sounded remarkably like longing. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their shelter, something new was kindling between species, between worlds, between two warriors who were discovering that sometimes the greatest battles were fought not with weapons but with the courage to be vulnerable. The storm had been raging for 3 days, trapping them in the cave system with nothing but emergency rations and the growing tension that crackled between them like electricity. Ethan had fashioned a more comfortable sleeping area, using their survival gear. But the confined space made it impossible to ignore the way Kalen moved, the subtle sounds she made, the intoxicating warmth that radiated from her scaled skin. On the third night, as they sat by the dying fire, Kalen finally spoke the words that had been building between them. I have never been with a human, she said, her voice barely audible, above the wind outside. Ethan looked up from the ration pack he'd been mechanically eating. I've never been with anyone like you either. It would be complicated. Our physiology, our cultures. The Matari High Command would consider it a betrayal of species purity. Her golden eyes reflected the firelight as she studied his face. Your people would likely think the same. My people aren't here right now. Ethan set aside his food and moved closer to her. And I've never much cared what Command thinks about my personal life. Kalen's breathing changed as he approached, becoming deeper, more deliberate. You do not understand what you are suggesting. Matari bonding is intense. We do not love gently. Who said anything about gentle? The question hung in the air, between them like a challenge. Kalen's pupils dilated and her scales shifted to that silver-blue pattern he'd noticed whenever he touched her. When she reached for him, her movements were controlled, but hungry. If we do this, she whispered, against his ear, her breath warm and carrying that unique Matari scent. There is no pretending it meant nothing. My species bonds for life. Good, Ethan replied, his hands finding the fasteners of her clothing. Because I'm not the pretending type. When their lips met, it was like fire meeting gasoline. Kalen's mouth was warm and alien, her tongue slightly rough against his, but the hunger in her kiss was purely universal. Her claws extended slightly, pricking at his back through his shirt. Not enough to wound, but enough to remind him of her strength. She was magnificent beneath his hands, all controlled power and barely leashed passion. Her scales were warm silk, under his palms, shifting color with her emotions, deepening to midnight when he kissed her throat, brightening to silver when his hands explored the curves hidden beneath her warrior exterior. You are so soft, she murmured, her voice thick with desire as her hands mapped his human anatomy with fascination. So fragile. Yet you make me feel... What? He asked, trailing kisses along her collarbone where scales gave way to something softer, vulnerable, fierce, alive in ways I have never been alive. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. You make me forget I am supposed to be stronger than you. You are stronger than me, Ethan replied, looking up at her. In every way that matters for survival. But strength isn't everything. What else is there? Instead of answering with words, he showed her. His hands and mouth worshipped her differences, the scales that caught firelight like jewels, the alien angles of her face that were somehow more beautiful than any human symmetry, the way she moved beneath him like liquid power barely contained. When she took control, rolling him beneath her with effortless strength, Ethan discovered what she'd meant about Matari intensity. She loved like she fought, with complete commitment, holding nothing back. Her passion was overwhelming, consuming, transformative. Later, as they lay entwined beside the fire, Kalen traced patterns on his chest with one retracted claw. My grandmother once told me that warriors recognize their equals not in victory, but in surrender, she said quietly. I did not understand her meaning then. And now? Now I know that surrendering to you does not make me weak. It makes me complete. She raised herself on one elbow to look at him, her golden eyes serious. I love you, Ethan Cross. By the old laws and the new, by blade and by bond, I choose you. Ethan felt something fundamental shift in his chest, not just desire or affection, but recognition. This was what poets wrote about, what songs were sung for, what made beings cross the void between stars. I love you too, he said simply. Whatever comes next. What comes next, Kalen said, settling back against his chest, is that we face two entire species who will not understand. Your military, my high command, the politics of peace between our worlds. Let them try to separate us. Ethan's arms tightened around her. I've already proven I can hold my own against impossible odds. Outside, the storm began to weaken, but inside their shelter, two hearts beat in synchrony, human and Matari, warrior and diplomat, lovers who had found in each other something worth fighting the entire galaxy to keep. The storm had passed, leaving Xerion 7's landscape transformed into a crystalline wonderland that would have been beautiful if it weren't trying to kill them. Their emergency beacon was still broken, their supplies nearly exhausted, and according to Kalen's calculations, they had less than 6 hours before the moon's orbit carried them into the shadow zone, where temperatures would drop below what even Matari physiology could survive. The extraction point is 12 kilometers through the shard fields, Kalen said, studying their tactical display. The crystal formations will provide some shelter, but they're also home to the apex predators. And with the storm's electromagnetic residue, the terrain is unstable. Ethan shouldered his pack, noting how Kalen still favored her injured leg despite her body's remarkable healing. "We'll make it. Your optimism is admirable, but..." Her words were cut off by a sound like breaking glass magnified 1,000-fold. The cavern shuddered, and through the entrance they could see massive crystal spires crashing down in domino fashion. "Cascade collapse," Kalen breathed. The storm destabilized the entire field. They ran. For the next 4 hours they navigated, a maze of falling crystal spires, each the size of a skyscraper. Ethan's human agility proved invaluable in the tight spaces, while Kalen's strength cleared paths through debris that would have stopped him cold. They moved like a perfectly synchronized unit, covering each other's weaknesses, amplifying each other's strengths. But as they neared the extraction point, disaster struck. A cascade of falling crystals created a bottleneck in their path, a narrow passage barely wide enough for one person, with unstable formations above threatening to collapse at any moment. On the other side lay safety, but the passage was deteriorating with each passing second. "I'll go first," Kalen said. "Clear the way." "No." Ethan caught her arm. "Look at the stress fractures. It'll hold for one passage, maybe two if we're lucky. But someone needs to brace the support crystal from this side until the other person makes it through." Understanding dawned in her golden eyes. "Whoever stays behind will be crushed when it collapses." "Not necessarily. There's a side passage, about 20 meters back. If someone times it right, they could make it. The odds are better than both of us dying here." Ethan kissed her fiercely, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. "Go. I'll be right behind you." "Ethan, no. I am stronger. I can..." "You're also the military commander who needs to survive to prevent a war. Go." For a heartbeat, he thought she would refuse. Then her warrior's discipline kicked in, and she nodded once, sharply. "If you die on me, human, I will follow you into whatever afterlife you believe in and kill you again. Looking forward to it." Kalen sprinted through the passage with liquid grace, diving clear just as the crystal formation groaned ominously. Ethan braced himself against the support crystal, feeling the massive weight pressing down through his shoulders and spine. The structure was failing faster than he'd calculated. He held it for 30 seconds. 40. At 50 seconds, he heard Kalen's roar of fury from the other side. She'd realized he couldn't make it to the side passage in time. At 60 seconds, the crystal began to crack under his hands. That's when the impossible happened. The crystal formation didn't collapse inward, it shattered outward, as if something had struck it from the opposite side with tremendous force. Through the raining debris, Ethan saw Kalen standing with a massive piece of crystal debris in her hands, her scales bright silver with rage and determination. "Run, you magnificent fool!" she bellowed. Ethan ran, diving through the crumbling passage as the entire formation came down behind him. They rolled clear together, covered in crystal dust and breathing hard. "How did you..." Ethan gasped. "Matari engineering training," Kalen replied, pulling him to his feet. "I calculated the stress points and applied force where it would cause controlled failure instead of collapse. Also, I may have mentioned that I love you, and love makes females of my species capable of impossible things." They made it to the extraction point with minutes to spare, their respective fleets appearing in the sky like salvation. But as the shuttles descended, reality began to intrude on their bubble of shared survival. "This changes everything," Kalen said quietly, watching the Matari shuttle approach. "My high command will want to know why I saved a human at considerable risk to myself." "What will you tell them?" "The truth. That humans are neither weak nor contemptible. That you have proven yourself worthy of respect, of alliance." She turned to face him, her golden eyes fierce with determination. "Of love." The shuttles landed simultaneously, disgorging worried diplomats and medical teams. Admiral Bennett approached with poorly concealed relief, while Kalen's second-in-command maintained the stoic expression expected of Matari military. "Successful mission, Captain?" the Admiral asked. Ethan looked at Kalen, who was being examined by her medical team while her golden eyes remained fixed on him. "More successful than you know, sir. I believe we've established a foundation for lasting peace between our species." Later, as they prepared to return to their respective fleets, Kalen approached him privately. "The High Command has agreed to extended cultural exchange programs," she said formally. "I have volunteered to serve as permanent liaison aboard your vessel." "Convenient. I am a very skilled diplomat," she replied with a hint of her old arrogance, but her eyes were warm. "I convinced them that keeping you under observation was a military necessity." "And is it?" Kalen stepped closer, close enough that he could see the silver threading through her scales. The permanent mark, she'd told him, of a Matari who had chosen their bondmate. "Captain Cross," she said softly, "you are the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to the Matari Empire. You have proven that humans are not weak, not contemptible, not beneath our notice. You have shown us that different does not mean inferior." "Sounds like I've accomplished my mission then." "Your mission," Kalen replied, reaching up to touch his face with retracted claws, "was to establish diplomatic relations. What you have accomplished is revolution, and I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring that revolution succeeds." As their ships prepared to jump to hyperspace together, Ethan reflected on the irony. He'd been sent to prove humanity's worth to an alien species, but in the end he'd discovered something far more valuable: that love, respect, and partnership could bridge any gap, no matter how vast the space between worlds. The stars stretched before them, infinite with possibility.